Welcome to Neurodivergent Faith, a podcast to help you navigate the beautiful and complicated intersection of neurodivergence and Christian faith and practice. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself, or you're a friend, family member, or church leader seeking to understand more about the neurodivergent Christian experience, you're in the right place. My name's Josh Davis. I'm autistic, ADHD, a spiritual director, and an ordained pastor, and I'm delighted to have you join me as we explore the unique ways neurodivergent people experience God, worship, community, and scripture, along with special interests, sensory and attention differences, social and communication challenges, and much more. Together, we'll break down barriers, confront misconceptions and assumptions, and celebrate the beautiful diversity of God's creation in all of us. So, if you're ready to think deeply and creatively, to reconcile your faith and your brain wiring, or you just want to hear what it sounds like when neurodivergence and Christianity have a conversation, come on in. It's a bit messy, definitely interesting, and we wouldn't have it any other way. We don't do small talk here, so let's jump into something real, raw, and robust. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Hold it. And let it out with a sigh. All right, here we go. Well, hello, beloved ones. You're listening to Neurodivergent Faith, and this is a podcast for those who long to connect with God in ways that honor the uniqueness of our minds, our bodies, our stories. I'm really glad to be here with you today. This is our last episode of season 1. It's hard to believe, but I've got one whole season, 13 episodes under my belt. I'm going to be taking a break here for a little bit, and I'm actually really excited. I've got some great interviews lined up already for season 2. But first, a break. And this morning, I'm recording this podcast after last night having led my worshiping community in an intro to neurodivergence. And I am exhausted this morning. My whole body hurts. I know I'm processing a lot of things, and we'll see how words go today. I'm not promising a lot, but thanks for being here. I'm glad to be here with you. I am your host, but I'm also your fellow pilgrim, and I am pastoring myself even as I pastor you through these podcasts. So here we go. Today's episode is called When Someone Says, I'm Autistic. And it begins with a simple, sacred moment. Someone turns to you, their voice may be soft. They trust you enough to say, I've got something I want to share with you. I've recently discovered, or I've recently been diagnosed as autistic. This may come face to face. It could come through a text message or through a social media post. And in that moment, how you respond matters. You may feel a little unsure. You may not have the words. I get it. I've been there. That's okay. You don't have to be perfect, but you're being invited into something holy. You're being invited in that moment into a space of deeper seeing, deeper knowing, deeper love. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to respond and how not to respond when someone shares this part of their identity and experience with you. We'll name the things people often say, perhaps with good intentions, but things that can actually be hurtful or wound the autistic person who's just disclosed. And we'll also explore some responses that can bring connection and honor and grace. Because this is not just about autism. It's really about learning how to meet others' vulnerability with love. It's about becoming a people who make room for all kinds of minds and hearts at the table of Christ. So, let's begin. When someone says, I'm autistic, it's not small talk. It's sacred truth-telling, and it's vulnerable. Even me, I've disclosed my autism broadly to the world on my social media, also through this podcast, right? I'm not at all ashamed of my autism, but still, when I disclose to a new person, it still feels vulnerable. This week, that happened to me where I disclosed to someone, and then for the rest of the day, I had this kind of inner, ooh, yikes kind of feeling on the inside of me. Like, what did I just do? Is this going to change the dynamic of our relationship? Are they going to respect me any less? Are they going to feel awkward around me or not know what to say? Or how is this going to play out from here? So here's this sacred truth-telling moment, right? And yet so often people respond in ways that dismiss or diminish that truth. Here are some common responses and why they can be harmful. And I came up with some of these myself. Some of these are things I've experienced, and some of these are things you've experienced that you've shared with me on social media or otherwise. First one, funny, you don't look autistic. Okay, this response suggests that autism has a certain quote-unquote look, and if we don't match it, our experience is invalid. And a lot of times this look is fueled by stereotypes. So many people fall outside of the stereotypical presentation of autism that's been portrayed on media or in the news for decades, right? A lot of people of color, a lot of women don't fit the traditional mode or look of autism. And I also don't fit the traditional look, quote unquote, of autism. This is a stereotype, but those of us who have masked our whole lives, who have grown up not knowing we were autistic until discovering that late in life, oftentimes people will say, funny, you don't look autistic, right? Autism is invisible. It's not about your appearance or the things that you do. Yes, there are autistic traits, but autism in itself is a different way of processing the world. It's how we process and experience the world, and it's a very internal experience. Sometimes that shows on the outside, sometimes it doesn't. There is no one way for autism to look. So let's just delete that phrase from our vocabulary. Funny, you don't look autistic. Really? What is autistic supposed to look like? There are so many varieties. And as we've said before on this podcast, and you'll see all over the internet, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. We all look different. Our sensory profiles are different. Our stims are different. Our social and emotional challenges are different. Our ways of communicating are different. There are some similarities. There are a cohesive set of traits that are used for autism diagnosis. However, the way it presents is going to be different. So there is no one look. Okay, here's another not so helpful response. You know, if you were more disciplined, the autism would go away. This frames autism as something that's caused by laziness or lack of effort. It's not. Autism is a neurotype, a God-created wiring, a way that our brains were wired and function. It's not a character flaw. We don't need to be fixed. We need to be understood. And when you tell an autistic person, if you were just more disciplined, the autism would go away, you are heaping more and more weight of burden to try to look and appear and function as a neurotypical person onto that person. And if you really believe that someone is created in the image of God as they are, then let's set one another free to actually be who we are, to have the needs that we have, to have the weaknesses and limitations that we have, to have the strengths and delights and joys that we have. Okay, next. Oh my gosh. This is one I think that's designed, people are wanting to connect when they say this, but it's not helpful. Here's the response. Well, you know, we're all a little autistic sometimes. Okay, so this may be an attempt to relate, but it actually erases the reality of the autistic lived experience. It reduces a lifelong, pervasive way of being to a passing quirk. And that kind of minimizing is not solidarity, it's disconnection. Now, that said, autistic traits are human traits, right? So, of course, people have quote unquote autistic traits, and they're not autistic, right? To be autistic, you have to have a collection of traits, and those traits have to have been present with you since childhood, and they have to be causing significant challenges in your life to receive a diagnosis of autistic. So when you say, well, we're all a little autistic sometimes, you're actually dismissing the lifelong lived experience of not just having one of these traits, but having the collection of traits and having them profoundly affect your life. Okay, a couple more. This one I shared on an early episode, but I've actually had someone say this to me. They said, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. I'll pray for your healing. Okay, I understand that maybe you are motivated by compassion for me. But here's what I want you to know as an autistic person, and this is my personal opinion. I know others who agree with me, but not everyone will agree with me on this, and that's okay. But my opinion and position is this. Autism is not a disease. It is not something that I want to be healed from. It is my way of processing the world that makes me who I am. It's part of what I love about myself. I would hate for that to be quote unquote cured. I'm not asking to be cured. I believe most autistic people are asking to be loved as we are, accepted as we are. So if you pray, let your prayers be for our belonging, for our safety, for our joy, not for our erasure, not for part of who we are to be completely obliterated. That's not what I want you to pray for. Next up is one I hear from a lot of parents of autistic kids. They get this response. Oh, I'm so sorry. But this response treats autism as if it were a tragedy. Many of us are not sorry to be who we are, and many of the parents I talk to are not sorry that their child is wired the way that they are wired. We are learning to celebrate the beauty and the differences, and what we need isn't pity, it's presence. One mom of autistic children said to me sometimes when she's feeling a little snarky, if someone says, I'm so sorry, she'll say, for what? And I like that response. There's nothing to be sorry for here, okay? Compassion? Sure. Empathy? Sure. Pity? No, thank you. How about this one? I tell somebody that I'm autistic, and their first response is, oh, well, you're obviously high functioning. That might sound like a compliment, and maybe it's even intended to be a compliment. I can really open myself to that possibility. But it centers how well we seem to perform rather than how we feel or what we actually need. And this kind of comment creates this pressure to mask, to hide, to hold it all together, even when we may be falling apart on the inside. You're so high functioning. Now, I will say this. In United States DSM autism language, the levels of functioning are not used. We don't use those terms anymore. Now, in other countries, they do. So I'm not saying that one is right or wrong, but to say that someone is high functioning, usually what we're saying is that they are high functioning in ways that neurotypical people appreciate and value, okay? Because someone may be very high functioning in certain areas of their life and low functioning in other areas of their life. For example, I use language really well. I write well. I communicate well. Now, ask me to open something up, ask me to open a container, and I have the hardest time, and it is super frustrating for me. Am I high functioning? Am I low functioning? Well, it just depends on the area that we're looking at, right? So that whole label of high functioning, low functioning, I don't find it to be helpful. And I know people are trying to, encourage me. Wow, you're so high functioning. Congratulations. But it does seem like it puts all this pressure on me to keep functioning at a level that I am engaging with the neurotypical population. And listen, I am working so hard. I'm using all my resources, all of my intelligence, all my creativity. It's all being used so that I can, quote unquote, function in a society that wasn't built for me and that doesn't take me as an autistic person into consideration. I've got a few more responses that are not helpful. And then at the end of this section, I want to share with you the response that has been the most painful for me. Okay? So a couple more here. One, how did you get autism? Okay, this question treats autism like it's an illness or something that you can contract, something that's contagious, like the flu or a cold. But autism isn't something you, quote unquote, get. It's an integral part of how we're wired from the very beginning. Asking this question reduces our identity to this idea of a puzzle that needs solving. How did you get autism? And maybe implied in that is like, what can I do to avoid getting autism? This is not the way that autism actually works. How about this response? I say, I'm autistic, and someone says, can you do fast math like the Rain Man? Right? And I get it. Like, we understand things based on media that we've consumed, based on representation that we've actually experienced, right? And this response ties autism to this very narrow stereotype. While some autistic people have savant skills, and it's beautiful and it's amazing, most do not. And that doesn't make their autism less valid. We are whole people, not caricatures. Autism is not a superpower. It is a combination of strengths and weaknesses, just like everyone has. We're not here as autistic people to entertain or to perform or do party tricks for you. So don't assume, just because of what you've experienced on the media, that you have the accurate idea of what autism is. And remember that autism looks different for each person. So really what you want to do is ask what that means for the person that's sharing with you. What does that look like? What is your experience in the world like? What are you sensitive to? What are you undersensitive to? Where do you find challenges relating to the neurotypical world? We'll talk more about healthy responses in a minute, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, I've saved the two most painful responses that I've experienced to last. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on them, though I could, trust me, but I do want to mention them. One, I've had somebody actually say to me, "You're not autistic." This is after I went through the formal diagnosis process. I was diagnosed by an autism specialist with many letters after her name. And I had this person say, "You're not autistic. You need to repent." Wow. I can't tell you what a gut punch that was for me. It felt completely dismissive. It was confusing. I was like, repent for what? What am I repenting for? I assume that they meant that I should repent for, quote unquote, lying that I am autistic. Wow. Now, on one hand, I kind of laughed about it because I'm like, well, my mask really worked. If I convinced you that strongly that I'm not autistic, my mask, y'all, was and still can be really strong. But it cost me so much. Digging into this response, and then it took me a while, to be honest. It took me several days of sitting with this, of feeling really unsettled on the inside, of praying, of talking to God about it and processing it. And then I started to unpack it a little bit and realized, okay, this is coming from a parent of an autistic child whose experience of autism is so different from mine. And I was able to access some compassion and to go back to them and say, hey, I get that this is really frustrating and confusing that we have one diagnosis that covers such a wide range of presentations and experiences. I do want you to know that this was formally diagnosed. I gave the credentials of the person who diagnosed me, and I asked that they not call into question my internal experience, and I also extended compassion and care for their experience of autism through their child. Wow, it took a lot to get to that place, if I'm honest, but that was really unsettling. Thankfully, their response was good and settling from that point on. I had to do a lot of work to get there, but I'm really glad that I did, and I feel okay about that interaction now. But initially, man, it was such a gut punch. Okay, last, the response that has been the most painful for me personally. This might not be the case for others, but for me personally, the response that has been the most painful is this. I explain that I'm autistic. I may even go into detail about some of my sensory needs or desires for accommodation or consideration. And the response is silence. Nothing at all. They don't respond in the moment. They never circle back later to ask more questions. They never bring it up in conversation. This has happened with people that I'm around quite frequently. This has happened with people that I'm quite close to. And it's almost like that part of my life does not exist to them. They won't acknowledge it verbally. They won't bring it into conversation. They won't get curious about it. Here it is, this profound revelation that I have when I'm 47 years old that explains my whole life. It allows all of my life to make sense. And people that I'm close to, people that I interact with on the daily basis, they don't appear to be interested. Now, silence is tough because sometimes silence can be protective. But the problem with silence is when you are silent, you leave room for the other person to interpret. And so I'm over here going, I really don't know why people are silent about this. Maybe they don't know what to say. Maybe they feel uncomfortable. Maybe it stirs up something in them that they go, oh my gosh, maybe I'm autistic and they don't want to deal with that. Or who knows? Who knows? But when I share something really vulnerable, and I'm not met with any kind of acknowledgement, and it feels like it doesn't exist in the space between us after I've shared it. I've actually questioned sometimes, like I've gone back because my autobiographical memory is not good, but I journal a lot so that I capture my memories there. I've gone back and said, did I actually tell this person? Because it seems like it didn't ever happen, right? And yes, I have actually told these people, but it's to that level that it causes me to question whether I actually shared with them because it's not being held in the space between us. And it can feel like the door just is completely closed, like that part of my identity and experience, which is a big part of how I experience the world, it's not welcome in the space between us in our relationship. And I don't know what to do with that, to be honest. It feels like I don't matter. If I can't be autistic in my relationship with you, then I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be. I don't know how we can have this relationship. So silence particularly has been super painful for me and confusing for me. Okay, that's my list of unhelpful responses. I know if you're listening to this podcast and you're autistic or you're the parent of an autistic child, you've probably heard other unhelpful responses, and I would love to hear from you. Send them to me. You can find my email in the show notes, or you can find me on social media, Josh Davis on Facebook or Autistic Pastor on Instagram. Let's connect, and I'd love to hear more from you, and maybe in future episodes, I'll include some of the things that you've experienced here. But I want us to just take a breath and to take a moment to reflect on all these unhelpful responses. Maybe there's one specifically that's like poking at you. Maybe you've given that response before, or maybe you've received that response and you're feeling some kind of way about it as you listen to the podcast. Just going to give you a minute to breathe, to talk to God about that, or to just give that to God. And then we're going to come back in a minute with some helpful responses. Some of you may not know, but I am a singer and a songwriter and a composer, and music has been my most enduring special interest since I was very young. And so all the music in the podcast, intro music, interlude music, is music that I've created myself. And it's just a small way of me sharing my special interest with you. Today, recording this podcast, I'm noticing has been especially challenging for me. Lots of takes, lots of editing so far, and I'm not done yet. And I just took a break for a few minutes to get my safe food. Every morning I eat a bagel with cream cheese and Italian seasoning and garlic salt, and felt my body settle as I started to eat that, and then also dove for a few minutes into watching some videos of amazing singers. There's nothing that gives me quite as much joy as someone who is just an amazing singer and in their element when they're singing. Just moves me at a really deep level. So feeling a little bit more resourced, and I want to finish this podcast off with some hopefulness and some encouragement. We've talked about ways that are not helpful that you would respond to someone disclosing that they're autistic. But let's talk about some things that could be helpful. What can we say? How can we meet these moments with grace, especially if we're feeling unsure? Here are some simple, sacred responses that could help build trust and deepen connection. Number 1, thank you for telling me this. It means a lot to me. This honors the courage that it takes to share something personal. It says, I see your vulnerability and I receive it with care. You don't even have to have an opinion. You don't have to even know how you're processing it yourself to be able to say these words. Thank you for telling me this. It means a lot to me. Here's another one. I want to understand more. Get curious. Curiosity is a form of love, and it's actually one of the forms of love that I receive most deeply. It registers for me as love very, very deeply when someone is curious about me and about my own lived experience. I want to understand more. This says, you matter enough for me to keep on learning. Here's another one you could try. You could say, how can I support you? What would be helpful for you? How can I encourage you or accommodate you? Right? This centers the person's needs. To be autistic is to need support. In DSM-5 language, you're either a level 1 support, a level 2 support, or level 3 support. But to be autistic means you need support. So how can I support you? What a great question. This opens the door for conversation, for collaboration, and for consent and agency. How about, thank you for trusting me with this? Trust is not a given. In fact, trust can be really difficult for a lot of reasons for autistic people. Maybe we'll unpack that later in a different podcast episode. But trust is not a given, it's a gift. And naming this honors the sacredness of the moment. Thank you for trusting me with this. Or if you wanted to go a little bit more along the lines of that curiosity, how about, what does autism mean for you? I know each autistic person's experience is different. It's unique. So what does autism mean for you? This question allows them to share their own story and their own experience on their terms. What a gift. Or you might say, I'm learning how to be a better friend, leader, or ally. Let me know when I get it wrong. That is so permission giving. And it just levels the playing field and acknowledges we're going to make mistakes. It's not going to go well sometimes. We're all going to miss it. But humility keeps the door open and it builds this sense of safety. Lastly, you might consider saying, I'm here and I'm glad to be with you on this journey. Because one of our deepest fears is that if we're truly known, we will be left behind. Your presence says you are loved, you're not too much, you are not alone. And I would encourage you to make this an ongoing conversation. Don't think of it as a one and done kind of thing. They share, you give your initial response, and that's it. But you might come back with some of these responses later through different means of communication. Maybe some of the time it's face-to-face. Maybe you text, or maybe you email or leave a voice memo for your friend, and you keep the conversation going. I can tell you from my own experience that is so meaningful when it happens. I'd like to close this episode with this short reflection. When someone tells you they're autistic, they're not looking for your pity, and they're not handing you a problem to solve. They're saying, this is part of who I am. Can you see me? And as people of faith, we follow the one who sees with eyes of compassion, the one who never turns away, the one who makes space for every person, every body, every mind at the table. So you don't need the perfect words. You just need an open heart. Let love be your teacher. Let curiosity be your compass. And let's become a community that holds neurodivergent stories gently, with reverence, with respect, and with radical belonging. You are not expected to know everything, but you are invited to love well. And that, my friends, is a sacred place to begin. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Neurodivergent Faith. If this episode spoke to you, please share it. It's one of the best things you can do to help the podcast is to spread the conversation. Pass it along to someone who may need to hear it. And if you're someone who's had to say, I'm autistic, like I have, and you didn't know how it would land, I see you. You are not alone. Until next time, may we walk in the deep peace of being known and loved. I'll see you next season.